I just want to say, can you believe we're in the month of April, the 2nd of April? And I know all of us, and what year are we in? 2023. I feel like 2023 is our lucky year. My birthday was 323. Joanne Dufour's birthday was 323. 323, 2023. Think of those numbers. What do they mean? Do they mean peace and happiness? Well, Robert would tell you that's the truth. You know, in times of stress, which is what a lot of us are feeling, and turmoil, do you ever feel like happiness is just out of reach? With Robert, once in a while, we would do these workshops called Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness. And we based it on not only his book, but on the life we had together. And recently, I read something that said, as in any marriage, both partners are changed by the union. And I was listening to Joyce Wyckoff. She just got back from a kind of a seminar, a retreat, and she has a really close friend, a man and a woman in a close friendship, and it's based on friendship. And then it doesn't matter if you're married or if you're in friendship, something happens when both partners are changed by that union of minds, that union of feelings, that union of a vision. Robert and I had the same vision. And so when we worked together for these seminars on Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness, it was like we were speaking as one. And I was just reliving prior to the meeting today how he lived in Costa Rica and I lived in Santa Barbara. And together we would just have these amazing telephone conversations because we didn't see each other. We just heard the words and they resonated in our bodies. And I can remember just being so in love with him, taking him to the airport and saying, goodbye, dear. You have to go to Costa Rica now and I'll stay here. But I just look so forward to your messages on my answering machine. I even forgot what that was called until somebody reminded me that was an answering machine. And I would listen to those messages on the answering machine, filled with his heart and his love. And I would just sit in the dining room and just sit there and just feel that emotion of love. And I think that's what Robert wanted us to feel, was the love that he felt for the universe. And when he joined the United Nations after winning that essay contest, and his mother said, now you're going to work for the other family that counts, the human family. She didn't want him to leave, but she knew that the human family needed him. And so with that, he began to start his journals. I have 100 boxes of his journals, of his archives that I am lovingly going through. And today we're going to talk about Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness as we begin our second series in the book Peace Club. One of the things that I learned is that words have messages. And so as you read these stories in Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness, which was really because of Sandy saying, we have to get this book out there, Barbara. People need to hear these stories. And my co-partner today is Sandy Hinden. And if you look in the left corner up above, there's Sandy. Sandy is the reason so many of our invitations look so perfect, because he does that. And now he's working on peace polls for Rotary Club. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of peace polls around the world. And now we have a new QR code so we can all be unified as we go to our peace polls. But Robert had one wish. It is my greatest wish that these stories will inspire readers to be aware of all their blessings and to work for the happiness of others. All of us can decide to apply our talents, passions, and energy to cultivating the welfare of all human beings. If we can embrace our differences and common aspirations, cherishing and tending to our common natural habitat, at this critical moment, this was written in 1978. At this critical moment in history, it is our responsibility to support one another until our precious planet flourishes as the miraculous paradise that God always intended it to be. Those are his words in the beginning, the preface of this edition. When my son, David, was meeting Robert after we were married. He said, I like your book most of all. They taught me happiness. And Robert said, too bad it's out of print. We don't have any more copies. And my son, being a doer, an engineer who makes things happen, said, I'm going to republish it, Robert. And you are? Robert just could not believe it. And so in 2005, my son and his fiancee at that time, Nicoletta Planaguti, painfully went through every page and made it even more powerful, but they basically kept Robert's words. And when they were finished, Robert said, can I write a little dedication? And that dedication he wrote, and this is another, his words were so powerful. To Barbara Gone Mueller, my wife, a wonderful model of happiness. And to all the children and grandchildren who represent the possibility of a happy world of peace and love for all human brothers and sisters. A model of happiness. That's an important statement. Can we all become a model of happiness? Do we need a little help to get to being a model of happiness? Well, what do you think Robert wrote in the first chapter? Thank you, Dr. Coué. Dr. Coué is going to help us bring that model of happiness into our being. And I thought, okay, he wrote that, but guess what? I found the book that Emile Coué wrote, and I got it on Amazon. You can't see it, but if you could see it, it says Simple Self-Healing. Simple Self-Healing by Emile Coué. And I thought, I better read this again. Diane told me to read it. Emile is E-M-I-L-E, and C-O-U-E is Coué, Emile Coué. And I had been doing this, and so had Robert. But in the beginning of the book, I found out something brand new. You have to do this as you wake up in the morning. You have to take that every day in every way. I'm getting better and better. And I was repeating it once or twice, 22 times, and I'm going to say 23 times because this is 2023. So let's do Emile Coué every morning before we get out of bed, when the subconscious is like a sponge waiting for our message. And what do most people get up? My sister, God bless her, I love her so much, but what does she get up saying? How do I feel? Not how I feel. Every day in every way, I'm feeling better and better. I'm making it better and better. And he would say things like, every morning before rising and every evening on getting into bed, shut your eyes and repeat several times this little phrase, every day, every way, in every way, I am getting better and better, and it might save your life. Just think, every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. I started doing that. I'm a happiness person. I'm a person of positive energy. All of a sudden, I started walking straighter. I'm taller. I feel different. It's every day in every way, I'm getting better and better and feeling better. So I'm even learning from this method. But I read the book. I read Emile Coué's book. And he said, I may not be able to cure your disease, but I can give you the wherewithal to live with it in happiness and joy. And Emile Coué says right here, in comes a businessman complaining of nervousness, lack of self-confidence, and haunting fears. And this is page 17. When you know the method, said Dr. Coué, you'll not allow yourself to harbor such ideas. Oh, I work terribly hard to get rid of them, replied the businessman. Well, you're fatiguing yourself, says Dr. Coué. The greater effort you make, the more ideas return. You'll change all that easily, simply and above, without any effort. I want to, said this businessman. Listen to this. I want to, said this businessman. That's just where you're wrong, said Dr. Coué. If you say, I want to do something, your imagination replies, oh, but you can't. You must say, I am going to do it. And then it hits the region of the possible, and you will be successful. My son says to me, I always say, Dave, thank you so much for all you're doing. And he keeps saying, I'm trying. I'm going to teach him this page 17. Your imagination replies, oh, but you can't. But if you say, I am going to do it, and it's in the region of success, you will do it. So as you read, thank you, Dr. Coué, did you realize that Robert's always been a dreamer? He had expectations in his life that things would happen. And you're seeing a little bit of a fuzziness down at the bottom because she's in, I don't even know what country she's in, but I know Myra is a fabulous person who's having a little bit of difficulty. And so, Myra, why don't you stop your video and just listen to us? And I hope that works for you because I get to see you and I'm so grateful about that. So every morning before rising and every evening on getting into bed, shut your eyes and repeat several times. Every day and every way, I'm getting better and better. And one can add your own words. I was feeling wonderful, as Robert said, and I was thinking, holy cow, maybe I don't need to do this. But he hadn't had the opportunity to not do it, as I would say. And remember in the book, in the story about his friend who was dying of tuberculosis. And then Robert read the book on the way to giving him the books on email. And I know that's why he was alive when I met him, because he had used that method. And I remember in so many of our conversations, he would tell me, I'm alive today and I have a big responsibility. And I have to be that person that maybe other people need so they can get the energy to live their destiny. And he would say these words just like we were eating breakfast. I have to help other people fulfill their destiny. And then I would realize there's something about Robert that made Norman Cousins, who wrote the prologue or the preface to this book, the foreword. Norman Cousins met Robert Mueller when he was working at the United Nations, and he met him and he said, this is an unusual person. I think I'll have lunch with him. That lunch with him idea, every week on Tuesday, they had lunch together. Norman Cousins. Do you know who Norman Cousins is? Google him. You will be shocked. Norman Cousins wrote The Anatomy of an Illness. He's the one who cured himself by laughing. He had a diagnosis of he'd lived until he was 75, but when he was 40 something, he had a diagnosis he was going to live 6 weeks. And so he told his secretary, go get all the funny movies and put them on video, and I'm going to sit there and laugh at the hotel. So he put himself in well, you already know this, but he put himself in the hotel and he laughed for a whole week. And sure enough, he cured himself, or he could tolerate the illness that he had, and he lived to 75. And I remember Robert telling me after we were married, I never had the privilege of meeting Norman Cousins, but Norman Cousins and Robert would talk. They wouldn't just sit there and say, isn't it great that we have lunch together? No, they would talk in depth, so much so that Norman Cousins, when he published Collier magazine, I think that was the name of the magazine, he said, Robert, would you be the editor? And Robert said, I can't. I have to work for the human family. I have to stay at the United Nations. And so Norman Cousins and Robert continued for years having lunch every Tuesday. And I remember Robert telling me that Norman Cousins and I have something in common. I said, what do you have in common? Listen to this. We have high foreheads. Who would have thought your forehead gives you an indication of your brilliance? Look at Jim Halderman. Jim Halderman, we're going to expect great things from you. Those large foreheads, if you do anything, Sandy, all of us, you look at your forehead in the mirror and you say, my goodness, my forehead is teaching me that I have a brain big enough to solve all the problems for myself and to consider whatever needs to be done. Now, I talked a lot about our Emile Coué, and if you have any chance at all, you're going to see, and I'm saying this because I'm looking at the page 24, where Robert escaped from the Nazis. And this is what he said: if I have any chance at all, it is by doing something the Germans do not expect me to do. And that was when the Nazis came to arrest him. Think about that. If he wouldn't have read every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. If his friend would not have had tuberculosis, if he would not have gone to the library and picked out the book by Emil Coué, he may not have realized that he could escape from the Nazis, although I have a feeling he might have, because he was that kind of a thinker. But to do what he did took every bit of his imagination. Do you know that this is Robert told me this, our subconscious is more powerful than our brain? And I add, our heart is more powerful than our brain. So we have both of those, our heart and our subconscious. So as you know in the story, because we talked about it in the first book club, how Robert escaped the Nazis by walking straight down to them. And that was really important because it allowed him to escape and walk out the front door. And if those of you who do not know that story, go to Prophet the Hatmaker's Son, and you can read the story about how he escaped. And you can read it here in this chapter. Think about that. And so as we live our life, and we don't have as much of this as we used to, we get the newspaper. And what does the newspaper do for us? Brings us down, usually, right, Sandy? When we get the newspaper, you think, oh my gosh, why do they put what they put on the front page? And so read the newspaper from a distance with a great deal dose of big distrust, and do not let them poison your life. Why do they do that? You all know the answer. Because it sells advertisers products and ideas for better aspirin or better ways to make you feel better. But really, the body is the self-healer. And that's what the book told me about simple self-healing. It kept talking about, you don't need a doctor, but I know many of us might. You need to remember that your body is that beautiful instrument that can heal you and bring you to where you need to be. So Sandy, how do you read newspapers? This is Sandy Hinden. Sandy Hinden is my partner for making those beautiful advertisement sheets, if you want to call it that. Notices that about our book club. He's the one that created Mutually Assured Survival little stickers. He made the stickers for when I had 100 podcasts on Peace Podcast. Sandy is an artist. Sandy is a genius. And Sandy, I said, Sandy, you've known Robert longer than I have because you worked with him before I met him. And you worked with him at the United Nations. I said, would you be my partner on this and talk about how to read newspapers? Sandy Hinden, thank you for being here.
Okay. Barbara is different than I am. Barbara is like a storyteller. Her grandfather told her that she's a storyteller too, and she learned to become a storyteller. I never learned to become a storyteller. I do my work through graphics, through images, through PowerPoints, and I need those PowerPoints as tools to help me remember, because my brain seems to be filled with information, but I don't put them in words the way Barbara does. So to share what I learned in this chapter, well, first of all, I'll back up a little bit. I was really a very close communicator with Robert for 30 years. And so we communicated through letters for 30 years. And I met him, I think only once or maybe once or twice, but in person. But we were great friends through letters. So it was in the writing that I got to know him, and I continued that. So I want to read some little pieces from this chapter and weave them together. Barbara asked me, how do I deal with newspapers? I read about 6 hours a day online from the news, in newspapers, and other blogs and articles and other pieces, and I use them and I put them together into my own PowerPoints to do presentations, around the world. So I came across a phrase that somebody said about the news. It's like a fire hose coming at us, with intensity that we've never experienced before through the internet. So it's an amazing fire hose of 24/7 news cycles, and we're being bombarded from multiple channels. Look at all the cable channels, the YouTube channels. So like information is coming at us furiously. And so how does that affect us? That we can, if we let it impact our emotions, because my background is in psychology, and then I went into politics and then into economics, and it can capture our minds. We can become prisoners of the negativity in the news. So we have to, I use a mindfulness practice every day, while I'm walking on my treadmill to clear my mind of what has entered my mind through the internet. It's amazing. And mindfulness really works. So just to read again, that phrase is how to read the newspapers is this chapter. Read newspapers from a distance with a great dose of distrust, and do not let them poison your life. He opens this chapter by talking about the United Nations as the news source of accurate information from around the world. And it provides us the opportunity to study, diagnose, discuss, and make recommendations, and then for international action. He then goes on and he says that it remains therefore basically a question between the individual and massive institutions that spread unhappiness. It is a situation in which the individual is powerless, as in all similar cases, be it captivity, sickness, dictatorship, poverty, working for a bureaucracy or for a huge corporation. There is only one escape: reliance on the internal strength of the individual, his resilience, his resistance, his own outlook on life, his secret liberty that no one else on earth can take away from him. And he says, it is simply a matter of self-protection against the unwanted environment. And it is an easy case to win, for no one is forced to read the newspapers, to listen to the radio, or to watch the television. So then he also goes on to talk about where did he get this idea from? And it was from his mother, because his mother, she says to him, therefore, I do not want to be influenced by it. I have my own house and my family and care for. That is all I can do. I read the newspaper only to be informed of catastrophes that might come too close to us, such as another war. Otherwise, I could not care less. The world will never be happy and at rest. It will never reign to the satisfaction of everyone. So why should I make my life miserable by reading bad news? I have followed her example in all my life and seldom read any newspapers. I merely have the quick look at the index to see if something really is worth world shaking has happened. So he says, as a result, I am immune to New York's and the world's daily neurosis, and hence an infinitely happier person. Today, I no longer need books, for I have found my own philosophy and inner happiness amid the jungle. Like the duck swimming on the Hudson, I have grown impermeable feathers that protect me from the daily news pollution. Like my father, I do not listen to the radio and seldom watch television. And like my mother, I read the newspapers curiously, condescendingly, from a distance, and with an infinite dose of suspicion. Thanks to the wise example of my parents, I am particular about the nutrition of my mind as I am with the nourishment of my body. I seek the food, news, images, words, and sounds that I consider good for myself. That bring me health, happiness, and self-fulfillment. And I carefully avoid toxic materials that others wish to impose on me. So those are like important words for us to remember, that when we are scanning the internet, take them with a grain of salt, but don't let them capture our imagination. And as there was a great psychologist, an Italian psychologist, Roberto Assagioli, and he said that the imagination is more powerful than the will. And if they capture your imagination, you're gone. They're controlling you. So you have to be conscious, be mindful of that you are the one who's controlling your imagination, and then even going deeper to allow yourself to go into your subconscious to relax. Like I studied hypnosis, and was taken by Robert's appreciation for Emmanuel Coué, and the imagination is like, it's there, it's part of the brain, but then your unconscious is even deeper, and it is a whole study of brain waves you could look at to see the different brain waves and how they're interacting. And even below mindfulness is a spaciousness that you can access that will bring you into deep connection with your inner wisdom. And Assagioli can have helped you connect with your own inner wisdom. He would do a guided imagination for connecting with the inner wise one. So that's also in there. And you don't want your imagination and your inner wisdom to be knocked out by the media.
And as Norman Cousins said in the preface, our frustrations also arise from the mistaken belief that the complexity of life preclude happiness, that life is something from which we must flee to be happy. And Robert resisted that. And he would say that the notion on the premise that it is unavoidable, indulgence is imagination, will overcome the futility of trying to understand what's going on. Sometimes we would be making a speech like in Sardonia, and this man would stand up and say, "Oh, Dr. Mueller, you're so important. I'm just a little man in Sardonia." And Robert would say, a little man in Sardonia could do a lot. What were you doing at 5 o'clock this morning? And the man would say, "I'm sleeping." And Robert said, "Not me. I was cleaning the beach." And I was there. Barbara Mueller was standing there. Say, "Robert, what are you doing? You're in your new suit. You're going to make a speech in an hour. What are you doing? This needs to be done," he would say. Whatever needed to be done, he did it. And the pile got bigger. We had toilet seats. We had underclothes. You would not believe what was in that pile. So he told this man, happiness is about doing what's needed in the moment. So what if I'm the Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations, started the University for Peace? The beach needed to be clean. And so the whole audience just looked at Robert like, okay. And now they have the annual beach cleaning in Sardinia. But it started with Robert knowing the beach needed to be cleaned. And I remember Robert being told so many times, "Robert, how can you be so optimistic when in reality, there's so much wrong in the world?" And Robert would say, "I put that on the side. That's information that I need. But then I live my life as Robert Mueller, the vision I have." One of the things that I learned from Robert in my marriage with him is a vision will drive you. And the invisible spirits will help that vision become reality. 1990, I wrote down on a piece of paper, "I want to be with the world's server." I want somebody who's making a difference on the planet. And I want to be able to call him my life companion. And I want X amount of money in the bank, and I want to own property. Well, I just put it in my wallet and forgot about it. I marry Robert, and I'm cleaning out my old wallet. And I'm thinking, what's this piece of paper here? I pull out the paper, and it's got my vision of what I wanted. And here's my Robert fulfilling all those. Yes, I want this. Yes, I want that. He fulfilled that for me. He was a man working for the world. We lived in the cabin I thought we would be able to have someday. So write down those dreams. Let that vision propel you. Not the ordinary, extraordinary, but the vision propel you into the future. The invisible spirits will help you. You don't know all the books we have all read that tell us that if you know what you want, the invisible spirit world will help you. And here's Robert. And I said, Robert, look, I found this in my wallet. He was not the least bit surprised because he had been living his life visualizing peace on planet Earth. When we got married and Eleanor said, I'll take you to Scotland for your honeymoon. I thought, Scotland? Okay. And we went to Findhorn, and I saw an entire community based around love, cooperation. And remember, you read these stories about Eileen Caddy. They would grow cabbages the size of a cow practically, but they didn't even, the magic of knowing what you want produces miracles. And I tell you these things, but I know you will find your own miracles. And so Robert gets locked up in a prison. You all know that he had many lessons, from Dr. Coué to night guard in Gavors, which is going to be Sandy's, but happy even in prison. A human being, this is so powerful. A human being is always a prisoner of something. The only real freedom is the freedom within ourselves. Now, I say that to you, but yet I know it's hard to realize that the freedom that we want on our planet starts with us. I have the privilege of living in a very quiet home. I have the privilege of having a garden full of vegetables and fruit. Well, I work on it too. You know, you just can't wait for it to happen. You got to get that energy out there. So I'm out there hoeing my weeds, and I'm planting my cabbages, and I'm picking my grapefruit and making juice. But the things that we want sort of come to us when we know what we want. And I say that to you again, because here was Robert stuck in this prison, happy even in prison. And I remember him telling me, it was a worst situation of my life. I'm stuck in a prison with all these prisoners, and all I have is my imagination. And so I use my imagination to take me out of that prison. And in one of his stories about being in the prison, he found a pencil in his pocket, and he went to the very front of the prison and he wrote a love story. He imagined himself being in love with a beautiful woman, and it took his mind away from the horrors of that prison, where there were 30 people in the size of your bedroom, maybe a closet. They were just stuffed so tight they couldn't even sit down or lay down. And he had that. He said he just had to get to the front of there where there was a slight crack in the door so he would have air, and he wrote that story. You know, these stories that come from Lessons from War are amazing. And you know so much about Robert, because those of you who were on the first book club, you heard about Robert, who decided he was going to work for peace at the age of 3. And his dad said, I pity you, young man, because now you are going to work for the human family, but you're going to have no money. You're not going to be rich working for peace or going to the United Nations. That didn't stop him. He went anyway, and he had untold happiness and he had untold sorrow, because he would find the things that weren't working, and that's what he would work on. And as you read this book, most of all, They Taught Me Happiness, you're going to find the profound stories from meditation to prayer to Dr. Coué that saved his life. And I hope you continue to read the turning points. And did you read my moment this morning, the little message I sent you? The message about that Justine Toms Justine Willis Toms is going to be our next speaker. David Wick, who you just saw give it a high sign, had her come to our Rotary E-Club, and I had not seen her in about 20 years. And I said, Justine, you're here. And she said, Barbara, and we knew each other back when Robert was on New Dimensions Radio. And because of David inviting her, we have now, as if we haven't left it 1 minute of our friendship go to the side, and we are now talking and being together, and she's going to be on Peace Podcast, and she's going to give the next chapters of Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness. And I am so delighted. And if she's not the person who can talk about lessons from adulthood, if you know about New Dimensions, how many people has she interviewed? Authors, peacemakers, economists. And so I thought there's nobody better. And she said yes. So she's going to be on for our next chapters that we're going to do. And Most of All, They Taught Me Happiness. There's some moment of moments that we all live in. Each of us have so much to offer the world. And I hope as I look at you that you realize that this is our time. This is the time that the world has been waiting for, the time when there's a lot of things that are going to shift, and we have to be ready for it. I just wrote a message to Jane Goodall, who lived with a chimpanzee and is famous now. I wrote a message to her. Joanne, you're going to love this. It's her birthday. And I wrote her a birthday message because she's an Aries. I don't know what your signs are, but Aries have no choice. We just have to go forth and do it. We have to be bold, just like my tea bag said this morning, the little note said, be bold. We have to be bold. So you all, whatever your sign is, just take it and make it what you want it to be. And so as I look at Joanne and I realize we were both born on March 23rd, and we look around and then on my 60th birthday, I was in Mount Rasur in Costa Rica, in that humble little cabin that Sandy showed you last session, that humble little cabin. And my sister calls me, we had good internet there. And she called me and she said, what are you doing on your 60th birthday? I said, I'm climbing Mount Rasur. You're climbing Mount Rasur. Who's with you? I said, nobody, just me and my iPhone. But aren't you afraid of the snakes and the scorpions and all the other things, the scorpions and all the other things? And I said, no, I feel I'm protected. I'm going to climb Mount Rasur. So I was invited to speak to the Rotary Peace Builder Clubs. And I said, how many mountains do we climb? How many mountains do we have to climb in our life? But that's the fun part, the challenges of climbing the mountains in our beingness and our being there present. So anyway, when I think about Mount Rasur, it was the vision I had for peace on the planet and the legacy of Mount Rasur. From this mountain, peace shall go to the entire planet. And those of you who did not see my cabin that I was living in with Robert last time, just go to robertmueller.org and look at the cabin. You will see a corrugated tin roof. You will see I can't even describe it, but it is not what is called a luxury hill where most kinds of seminars take place. This was a humble little cabin, and Eleanor's on this call. Eleanor is a saint. Eleanor would come to our home. She never said anything about the way we live. She'd just say, how'd you make this delicious dinner? And I said, well, Eleanor, I don't have a stove or an oven, so I used a rice cooker. And Eleanor would come and we would have these marvelous dinners together and talk about Robert and the books he was producing. So with that, I'm going to now go to Sandy. Sandy, which chapter are you going to talk about now?
It's Night at Givors. He said that have a dream and believe in it. Strong dreams always come true. Now, I don't know if that's true. I've had almost as many dreams as Robert has, and most of my dreams don't come true. But then I realized that, well, thank goodness they didn't come true, because sometimes you have to be careful about what you're wishing for. Sometimes all kinds of things can happen in your dreams, in these projects, and sometimes it's best that they don't come true. So, but I think for very powerful dreams, you put a lot of energy into them and you do make some progress. So Robert said, my thoughts were wandering in the past and in the future. I had always loved people, the world, and all manifestations of the miracle of life. As a child, I could watch for hours the clouds run across the moon, processed by an impossible dream. To be at the top of the world and to understand the laws and mysteries that held everything together. That's what he wanted to really understand. And he was in a unique position because he saw all of the different studies and activities that were going on in the United Nations. He would read about them, and then he would synthesize them into like a very comprehensive cosmos of like everything from the very smallest level, from the atomic level, up to the cosmic level, up to the universe, because he would learn about all of those things. And so he was always interested he always had a great curiosity and a great imagination. And then he goes on to say that the young germ, now he talks about that the war is ending in this chapter, and it's coming to an end. The Germans are in retreat, but he's on guard one night, and some young Germans surrender. He gets them to surrender, and he promises them that they won't be harmed. And this, I know, is one of the most powerful motivating forces in Robert's life. I know that for sure. So he says the young Germans had all been lined up in front of the cemetery wall and been shot by a firing squad by our Marquis. That's the French resistance. The priest of the town had apparently thrown him, because he had promised them, he personally promised them they would not be harmed. And he got them to surrender. The priest in the town had apparently thrown himself in front of the guns and ordered to prevent the killing, but he was pushed aside. The 20 young men were dead. I could not believe what I heard and ran to our commander in an indescribable state of furor. Despite my lower rank, I shouted at him, "What is this insane story I hear?" I had talked to these young men. They had surrendered against our promise that they would be unharmed. And they were almost children. They looked like me. We spoke the same language. They had a mother like you and me, and they had their dreams as we have ours. What madness went into you? What right did you have to take the lives of these boys? And so his commandant then explains what had happened, and there was a horrific situation, and where dozens of the French resistance, the barracks were burned, and so like he was furious at these young men, and so then he decided that he was going to kill them. So the faces of the young men came back to my mind. Yesterday they had been alive, now they were dead for all eternity. Their dreams, their hopes, their hearts, their love of their mothers, the pride of their fathers, all were gone forever, annihilated by a hand of bullets. The image came back to me of my father, who had worn 2 uniforms, known 2 wars, of my grandfather, who had 5 nationalities and known 3 wars, of my cousins. Now this is really the key to his life. My cousins, who were now fighting in different uniforms on different sides of the present war. So his own cousins were fighting against each other. That insanity drove him to want to work for peace for the rest of his life.
Just what's going on right now, Sandy, cousins shooting cousins, and we know that.
Yeah.
The thing that Robert used to tell me was, at least we haven't had a world war, but we still have war. And you know that, Sandy. And yet here was Robert with his optimism. Is there anything else you'd like to add from that chapter that really?
Yeah, there is. There's a few more paragraphs. So he says, this whole world seemed like a madhouse. Suddenly, an immense determination overpowered me. I looked at the fading moon and stars. My hand clenched my rifle in an iron grip, and I swore to God that I would spend my life working for peace in this wretched world. Then he goes on to say that it's a power drunk world, and the United Nations celebrates its 25th anniversary. I have reflected on a lot about humanity's accomplishments and failures during this period. One could cry at the lost opportunities to build a peaceful, more just and safer world. Most governments have played a selfish game and closed their eyes to the deeper currents of change that have seized our planet. The first atomic bomb exploded 6 months after the drafting of the UN Charter. So he then, towards the middle, he says, but how many times returning to home in the evening, I felt discouraged and frustrated by the slowness of the political understanding and international cooperation. Why did governments hesitate so much to put together their hearts, forces, and intelligence to solve humanity's problems? Perhaps someday we would reap the results and see the results and see flourish in a new era, an epoch of political maturity endowed with a Copernican vision of all basic relations on Earth. The real needs and limits, rights and obligations, present and future of the human race would then become clear. Political men would finally understand that we lived in an entirely new epoch, which required a cooperation and amity of all, and the support and strengthening of the planet's first global institutions. It was the happiest day of my life. U Thant, the Secretary General of the UN, had appointed me director of his executive office. I was to be one of his closest collaborators. This time I would meet full-face the challenge of my pledge during the night at Givors. As I took possession of my new office, images of people entering my thoughts, those of my father, my grandfather, my cousins, and the 20 young Germans at Givor. I took out my briefcase, the photograph of the emaciated young man dressed in an incomplete khaki uniform, wearing a revolver at his belt. It was one of my few mementos of the world. It could have been one of the young Germans, but it was not. It was my own picture taken while in the underground. I placed it on my desk to remind me every day why I was here and what my dream had been. And then he ends with, my dream of the night at Givors had come true. Strong dreams always come true.
Boy, if that's not the truth. He always believed that dreams, once you have them in your mind and you see them, then you can have them happen. And we have the bench of dreams in Costa Rica where people would sit and they'd hold a stone in each hand. And he would ask these elder hostels, what is your dream now? Go back to your childhood. What did you dream when you were a child? How did you feel that the world could be with that optimism you have as a young child? And then you would, once you see the dream in your mind, you throw one stone to the earth to remember, and then you take one with you. And we were in the Delegates Lounge at the United Nations, and Robert spent 40 years at the United Nations, as Sandy said in the beginning. He was so sure that the world would change with the United Nations. And we're in the Delegates Lounge, and in comes the ambassador from Costa Rica, and she says, guess what I have in my purse? And we all said, what do you have in your purse? She pulls out the rock that she kept from her bench of dreams in Costa Rica 10 years before. She said, I have always held this dream for peace, and I keep the rock with me wherever I go. When I change purses, that rock goes into the new purse. That rock is like a rock of hope and a rock of doing, and I am working for peace. And Robert never, as I'm going back to the beginning of the foreword, when Norman Cousins says, Robert never gave up. He took life on his own terms. He believed in the natural goodness of his fellow human beings and the effectiveness and the ineffectiveness of undervaluating optimism, not letting optimism go into your brain and into the present moment, the holy ground on which the future proceeds. Think of those words, the holy ground on which the future proceeds, our dreams, our vision. And I can tell you stories of when I was ready to give up in Costa Rica, but I knew the vision of Mount Resur from this land, peace will go to the entire planet. And that's what kept me there. You will always have something that's not perfect in your life, but the future is built on your dreams today. Robert Mueller justified the gift of life in his daily encounters with himself, with others, and his universe. He sanctified life by savoring it. And if he were to give you some words today, he would say, savor every moment of your life. You're alive. And remember when I read to you at the end in one of our chapters of our last go round, as for myself, when the moment will come to close my eyes on this beautiful planet, my heart will thank and honor all those who gave me life in the warmth of love, and him who permitted me to devote my earthly sojourn to peace, justice, and the betterment of the human condition in one of the most noble organizations ever born from the heart of man, the United Nations. I will go in peace and joy, thankful for having been blessed with the miracle of life. I will have loved my life with passion, embraced it with fervor, cherished every single moment of it, and I will have contemplated with wonder the sky and the running clouds, my brethren, the humans, my sisters, the flowers and the stars, and I will have feasted unceasingly on the treasure of life in all forms. I will not have dwelled on mediocre ambitions, hatreds, and complaints. I will depart with the belief that there is no end to life in the universe. And so as I read those words, I remember that Robert would always say, every decision we make in your life and mine becomes something that we work on. And so often we look for a way out, but maybe the way is in. Look inside. What do you really want? And I say this because I feel like I'm channeling Robert right now. Look inside. What is your dream? What is the vision that you want the world to bring to its full potential? And I look around and I see Mike Caruso with Global Peace, and I see Jim Halderman, Peace is Possible. And Mike, I must tell you, Michael, over in the corner on this bottom here, Michael Lesnick, he introduced me again to John Denver. He worked at Snowmass. He was with John Denver. And Mike, I just found all the music that John Denver gave to Robert. I am in heaven. I am playing John Denver. And if you have searched on Google for John Denver and the word peace, you will see his song that he wrote. And he said, when we know better, war is a sin. And he just went in and out of all the beauty of John Denver. And I have to thank Mike. I met Mike because his wife is a singer. A singer. Can you imagine why Robert always played Ode to Joy? Because he knew it opened your heart. Mike, why don't you give us a couple words about John Denver? Because he is now my new honorable hero as I listen to his music 24/7.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me. It's hard for me to talk about this without getting choked up. But I met Robert through John Denver and the WinStar Foundation when he did a speech in 1986 at the WinStar Foundation, and that was marvelous. But John, who, I worked for the WinStar Foundation. I can't say that I was a personal close friend of John's, but I met him and interfaced with him a number of times. But being around him and being around the co-founder of WinStar, Tom Crum, I saw things that were just marvelous. I was exposed to wonderful, wonderful things like Robert Mueller, for example, and many more. And John was a person who lived every day with passion and compassion, and was a true advocate for peace, and was a human being like the rest of us that was making his way through the world. And I know that John was influenced by Robert, and Barbara told me a story that probably very few people know, but John visited them in Costa Rica once, and it was after he had his wife had left him, his second wife, and his young child, and he went into the restroom and came out sobbing, and had seen a poster on the wall that Barbara and Robert had in the restroom, and it was called "A Time to Forgive." And he realized at that moment that he had to forgive in order to, one, be peaceful in himself, and that maybe others could forgive him as well, his wife in particular. But even somebody who, in my opinion, was a great peace worker, a great advocate for peace, learned marvelous things from Robert Mueller and Barbara. And
I was just reading the biography of John Denver, and he said most of his music was against the tide. Most people were worrying about Vietnam and all the other wars and everything. And here he was on this beautiful mountain writing songs. And so when he came out of the bathroom and he said, I read, decide to forgive, for resentment is negative. Resentment is poisonous. Resentment diminishes and devours the self. Be the first to forgive, to smile, and to take the first step, and you will see happiness bloom on the face of your brother or sister. Be always the first. Do not wait for others to forgive, for by forgiving you become the master of fate, the fashioner of life, the doer of miracles. To forgive is the highest, most beautiful form of love. In return, you will receive untold peace and happiness. And that's what John said he was going to focus on, forgiving his wife. Now, so many of you knew Robert, and not everybody had the chance to meet John Denver. But to meet that man was like meeting an ordinary person. As he said, I'm not fancy. I'm an ordinary person. I just believe that music and the songs that come from me are somehow what people need today. And I think John Denver is even more respected today for his casual way of living his life and giving us the music to remember him. So I'm going to go to David Wick for a moment, because David Wick spent Pathways to Peace, and Robert, David, and Avon Madison and Joni created the International Day of Peace. David, would you like to say a few words about how you felt Robert lived his life to the fullest?
Well, there's no question about that, and we have talked about it in many ways, and continually being the focus on optimism and being an example of that in so many ways. So I'd just say one of the things that really struck me in the book that we're reading, most of all, that taught me happiness, is when Norman Cousin, in the very, very beginning, he wrote, throughout history, man's supposed limitations have given way before the power of the human imagination, the ability of the human intellect to conceive of and do what has never been done before. The vision of life as it ought to be acts as a powerful magnet in the advance of the human race. And it's like, that's huge. Just that alone right there. And it really inspires me, some of the work that I'm doing with Pathways, as well as where I live in Ashland. Ashland, called the Peace Commission, but it is giving people the vision, helping show the positive thinking that this is a direction. This does helping just to even hold the vision of what's possible moving forward is huge, and that's what Robert lived. So that's very significant. I'll just say one of the things that we're doing with Pathways, just starting to pull together the foundation of a whole focus on, pardon me, yoga, you get it, yoga union of the culture of peace. Yoga of the culture of peace. So culture of peace is, as has been forwarded by Robert and others at the UN and so on, is all things is peace. But what are the practices? And this goes back to, I think what Sandra was talking about. You have a practice to help you keep balance, to help you keep your energy positive. So how do we do that ongoing? It's shifting our consciousness. And I think fundamentally that's what Robert was talking about, is shifting consciousness and through his continual focus and being in the happiness energy. It's an energy level. So that's it.
Thank you. I was reading from the book that Joyce Wyckoff put together, which is Robert Mueller's Centennial. And if it wouldn't have been for Joyce, I wouldn't have all of these stories right at my fingertips. The Centennial magazine that she created with Robert's ideas and my input allowed us to really remember this man who said his biggest decision in life was to be happy and to be deciding to be happy. And then I wrote the poem, Decide to Be Like Robert Mueller. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing people like Richard Denton, brand new to Robert Mueller. He didn't know Robert Mueller, but he said, to be like Robert Mueller, you have to imitate Robert Mueller. And so, Joyce, did you get anything out of all these stories that we've been writing about Robert Mueller? She is brand new to Robert Mueller. And I tell you, I'm going to let her tell you what she got out of it. Joyce Wyckoff, editor and artist and Gratitude Mojo.
Thank you, Barbara. And it was an absolute honor to be involved with creating that. I didn't do that. We did that. And you were always full of so many stories. I did meet Robert for a very short period of time. I invited him to speak to a group that I pulled together, and he was amazing. And I feel like that's one of the missed opportunities in my life, was to not get to be more acquainted with him, and that putting that magazine together was really amazing. And I guess I've just been, I don't know that it's one thing, but it's basically how much he impacted people. And it seems as though he impacted everybody he came in contact with. And that is such an inspiration to live our lives so that we're happy, we help other people be happy, we pass along whatever small bits of wisdom we come across. And I'm delighted that I get to be part of that event and part of all the events that you do, where you spread this inspiration as far as it will spread all the time. And I'm just inspired by everything.
Thank you, Joyce. I see lots of heads nodding, because we all stand on the shoulders of people who have gone before us, and we don't forget them. They're in our DNA. When I met Robert, it was Joyce who said, you better marry him, because even if you have 10 minutes with him, it's worth it. And then, 10 minutes, I had 17 wonderful years, and they weren't all perfect. Believe me, Robert also had his down moments. And I would say, Robert, I know you're down, but go down as deep as you can, because out of that depth of sorrow will come your new vision. And when somebody says to me they're feeling terrible and their life isn't working and they're depressed, I say, good for you, because out of depression comes your vision. So enjoy your depression. Let it go wherever you want. Now, how did I know this? I took a course at La Casa de Maria where I met Robert. And it was Dr. Frederick Hudson who said, let me show you the spiral of life. Spiral of life is not all happiness, not all joy. It goes like this, up and down, up and down. And he said, your first assignment is I want you to put a little line right in front of you, and I want you to go, and that line is the medium, and I want you to show me how many times you've been up, how many times you've been down, how many times you've been Lord above. If you would have seen all of the ups and downs that people live, you would say, well, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people who have ups and downs and things that aren't working. And that's the challenges. But I'm going to tell you about what I have learned, and he did it. He said, I have learned that out of your depression is where the wisdom comes. Out of your sadness is when the vision emerges. And he said, I know I wrote the book on adulting, and it's called How to Be an Adult. Realize that where you've been is where you need to be. And go back to your childhood dreams. And I'm going to tell you one more little thing about me. When I was in the third grade, I had an imagination. I had this vivid imagination in the third grade that I was going to live with the most romantic man on the planet in a high cabin on a high hill. And my mother would say, quit daydreaming and get over here and mop the floor. Mom, I'm in a daydream. I don't want to mop the floor. Well, I had to mop the floor, but my daydream did not leave me. Now think about that. What were your daydreams when you were young? Did I imagine that? I mean, I had this dream. It was like in the third and the fourth grade, I just couldn't get rid of it. And then I meet Robert, and he lives on this high hill, and he's the most romantic man I ever met. The love letters that he wrote me, I have a stack this high of love letters. He just knew how to profess his love for the world through me sometimes. I felt like he was writing those love letters, not only to me, but to each of you who are on today. And you realize when I was about to marry Robert, we said, we're not going to get married. We fight too much. We were fighting over a photocopying machine. Can you imagine a stupider thing to fight about? But we decided we weren't going to get married. That's it. So my mother calls up, and I'll tell you, don't tell anybody I told you this. My mother calls up and she said, Barbara, when are you going to stop living in sin? I said, Mom, I'm not living in sin. And so I tell Robert that. And what does Robert say? Okay, we're getting married. Well, that was less than 24 hours after we decided not to get married. Watch what you say you're not going to do, because then it will hit you square in the face. So I said to Robert, okay, Robert, if we're going to get married, all of our 6 children and our 11 grandchildren have to be there. We have to have the marriage license, everything by next Friday. This was Sunday. I said, the universe has to support us or we're not getting married. First thing we get in the car on Monday, we get the marriage license, no problem. We get airplane tickets for all my kids and all his kids and all the grandkids. They're all going to be there. The florist down the street made flowers for everybody. Everything worked together. I had flowers for the granddaughters. I had flowers for the grandson. And then the mayor of New York, Dobbs Ferry, said, I'll marry you. Everything was lined up like I had never seen before, except I didn't have a dress. I didn't know what to wear. I'm wearing this black, you're looking at my black dress here, the one that got me engaged to Robert, the one that got me married to Robert, and my girls came and said, Grandma, you can't get married, you're in black. And I said, oh, I know. I didn't have time to shop, but here, you were all bridesmaids. Here's flowers for your hair. Here's your bouquets to carry. Do you think they cared what I was wearing after that? Heck no. They were bridesmaids. Some were 2 years old. Some were 5 years old. Some were 7. And they were bridesmaids. And they were in my wedding, our wedding. And the next to we got married in the park on the Hudson River. And there was the Chard House. And we had this fabulous reception at the Chard House. I didn't even have to get in a car or a limousine. We just went next door and got in the reception. And I remember all the people in the Chard House saying, what a marvelous family. I said, I just married their dad. Can you believe it? I just married their dad, and I never even was going to get married again. And so this story goes on. Pay attention to your earliest dreams. Pay attention to things you're saying, never me, not me. Because that's when it happens. The universe knows more than we do. And so I thank you for today. Thank you for letting us share our stories. And please share your stories. I just did a workshop for Mike Caruso. What did I do with Mike Caruso? I told stories. I told my stories of my life because that's what people remember. And then I asked his audience to start to tell us their stories. What stories have you had in your life that you can share with others? And ask them for their stories. It's the stories that keep us going. And I thank all of you for joining us. You make me happy, and I like to be happy. And with that, Justine Toms is just around the corner on May. Let's see, what date is that going to be? I think it's May the 7th. May 7th, Sunday, we're going to have lessons from adulthood. There's nobody more qualified than talking about adulthood. So join us at 9:00 on May 7th with Justine Toms. And again, I thank you for being here. You made my day, and I hope we've given you at least 4 or 5 things that you can remember. And if you want to save the chat, because I think, Mike, you put in Jim Halderman, you put in for Barbie. And I think we're all set. Anything else anybody wants to add to this? Crystal, I thank you for joining us. She's a brand newbie. Anybody else want to say anything before we leave? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you all. Okay, my friends, have a safe week and a happy month. And we'll see you next month. Thank you.